Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion, Current Matters, Exploring the Lives of Water in Asia. This panel discussion is being held in conjunction with two exhibitions, Lost World, video art by Charles Lim and Gideon Mendel, who are both on our panel, and Perspectives, Rena Banerjee, which is also on view in the Sackler. Now, our moderator this afternoon was supposed to be Christos Michalopoulos of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Something came up for him. He wasn't able to make it, so you're stuck with me. I'm Tom Vick, the film program here. I hope you'll enjoy the ride anyway, and I'll do my best to moderate in his stead. Just a few things before we get started. Obviously, food and drink are not allowed in here, and I hope you'll remember to silence your cell phones to be polite to our panelists. And also, if you have to leave during the presentation, please don't use those doors. They lead to an emergency exit. Please use the ones you came in. Now, we do have today with us three distinguished guests. John Wennersten is author of, among other books, Global Thirst, Water and Society in the 21st Century. And Charles Lim and Gideon Mendel, as I mentioned before, are both artists whose works are on display in the Lost World exhibition. If you haven't seen that exhibition, it's in the International Gallery, which is sub-level 3 below the Sackler. It will be open this afternoon after this talk, so I hope you'll go see it if you haven't already. I've asked each of them to prepare a short, maybe 10-minute presentation, and so they'll each come up and do that, and then after that, we'll all sit on stage, and you can ask any questions you may have. So first up, John Wennersten. For the past several years, John has been writing books and articles dealing with estuaries, rivers, and watersheds. He has been an active board member of the Anacostia Watershed Society and also serves as alternate commissioner from the District of Columbia on the Interstate Commission for the Potomac River Basin, a four-state federally chartered organization which monitors and reports on all issues affecting the health of the Potomac River. Currently, he serves as occasional visiting professor on water policy for the Association of Indian Science Museums in Calcutta. His visits to India and its observation of its problematic water resources were a stimulus for him to write his book, Global Thirst, Water and Society in the 21st Century, which I should add is available for sale out in the lobby, and he will be glad to sign a copy if you pick one up after the presentation today. During 2011-2012, he was the consulting scholar to the exhibition Reclaiming the Edge, Urban Waterways and Civic Engagement at the Anacostia Community Museum of the Smithsonian Institution, research for which took him to London, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Los Angeles, Shanghai, China, and Madras, otherwise known as Chennai, India, and I think helped inspire his book and his thinking about global water. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Wennersten.
Thanks, Tom, for the nice introduction. Today I'm going to give an overview to be followed by my two colleagues who will be more specific in their approach to water and water issues in the 21st century, namely water in terms of flooding, water in terms of aesthetics, water in terms of what it is doing to our societies in a global context. Water is something that we hardly ever think about until we need it. We take it for granted largely in our Western countries. It's hardly a matter of conscious design that we think about water. But water in other areas of the world is something that is very much in demand, very much sought after, very much fought over. Only about 2.5% of the world's water supply is available for drinking purposes. I'm getting down my arrow here. And every era has been shaped by its responses to the great water challenges of our time. And today we live in, as I said, in an era of tightly managed hydrological environments. If every hammer sees the nail as its logical conclusion, water today is seen by engineers in terms of a dam. So that today, when I say that we live in an era of highly managed hydrological environments, what I mean is we live in an age of dams. And nearly every freshwater resource on the planet is managed, and we're victims of this management in the 21st century. On your right, you see, hang on. On the right, you see a very aesthetic approach to the whole problem of thirst. Here are the water charts put out by the United Nations, and it shows that there's a lot of water in the world today, And the amount of water that is available to the world in a global context today is the same amount that was available to the world in the age of the dinosaurs. It has shifted around considerably. But the amount of fresh water available, 2.5%, is another matter entirely. Here you see a map of the world water scarcity. And you see that certain areas have an abundance of water, certain areas have practically no water whatsoever. And so we in the West, it's a selfish conceit that we have plenty of water. We can't understand why certain societies have different approaches to water and water management. Many of us can't understand why the Chinese are building so many dams. But if you live in China today that only has 17% of the water supply that it really needs, you can understand how concerned they are. To the left is the Blue Plains sewage plant of Washington, D.C. It currently manages the sewage problems of one of the biggest cities in the United States. Coming up is the Ganges River, source of water consumption, source of holy ordination, source of spiritual growth, source of agriculture, and indeed it is one of the most imperiled rivers in the world at this point in terms of pollution and toxics. Lest we not get too conceited about our own way of life, this is the Anacostia River just a short period of time ago, and it shows you how polluted the Anacostia was. We're now cleaning it up. We passed the Clean Water Act in this country about 40 years ago, and we're still trying to get it right, largely because there's so many exemptions to the Clean Water Act. Even though it was federal legislation, people have lobbied the thing to death to try to get exemptions from various aspects. This is a picture of a young boy in Jakarta taking a bath, and you ask yourself, would you really be interested in bathing and cleaning in that kind of water? But you can notice he has his let me get my little gizmo on it. He has his toiletries right here and his bath shoes on. So he's ready to go. This is a, let me go back a little. The Japanese are very intrigued by water issues, and their water issues are mostly issues of the toilet. And indeed, they have some of the most sophisticated toilets in the world. And today, you can even go into Japanese restaurants and find restaurants that use toilets as a theme for eating. That is, you sit at a toilet and you eat out of a toilet. I don't know whether that would turn you on or not. It certainly doesn't turn me on. But nevertheless, there you are. The next one, if you really have to go and you're too busy, you can just take your toilet on your motorcycle with you. The major problem in Asia today is corporate water. This is a very nasty cartoon of a mosquito siphoning water, and it's labeled Coca-Cola. The intent of the cartoon is to show you that the Coca-Cola bottlers are killing agriculture in India, in many parts of India, especially this part along the eastern region of India, especially the area around Madras or Chennai, largely because they force the farmers to dig even deeper wells because the Coca-Cola bottlers want pure water, so they're sinking deep wells and taking out the good water and forcing the farmers to dig wells, and this is a very problematic thing. So there's what they call a significant amount of what the radicals in India call water looting by the Coca-Cola people. Today, India's water problem is how long can an intense irrigation system support India's population growth with over 1 billion people. The monsoons are growing increasingly capricious, the ever-present monsoons, which come in the late summer, early fall. And some years the monsoons come, but they send all their rainwater onto the ocean. And increasingly, India is relying on groundwater for more than half of its irrigation water. But this groundwater has all kinds of toxics in it, especially from bore wells that have arsenic in them. And it's not a very pretty scenario because the food produced from a depleting water table is tantamount to an unstable food bubble, And so this is something that the Indians are going to have to deal with as time goes by. Just a quick shot of the vanishing drinking fountain. I don't know whether you've been aware of it, but drinking fountains are slowly vanishing in the United States in favor of bottled water, which if you want to drink water, you should drink out of a fountain and not buy bottled water. Here is the two major aquifers of the world. This is the aquifer that covers much of Egypt and Sudan. It is currently being depleted rapidly. The next one is the Ogala water aquifer here in the United States, which supplies most of the water for the Midwestern agricultural base. And it's interesting, we're pulling out tremendous quantities of water to grow corn to turn into gasoline. It's something worth considering. Thirsty giants, China and India, with 20% of the world's population. As I said, China has 7% of its fresh water needs, India with 17% of the world's inhabitants and 4% of its readily accessible fresh water. By 2050, both of these countries are expected to go into some kind of crisis because the population will double and the water supply will be declining. Here is one of my favorite pieces for you. How am I doing for time? Okay. This little dot here is a tunnel pipeline that starts in Beijing in the Banai Sea and goes all the way out into the western part of China. It is a pipeline to carry desalinated water all the way out here for coal mining operations. And then when it's finished with the coal mining operations, they use it to flush and clean the coal, and then it goes into the public water supply. I hope by then it's a little bit more clean than it is when they're using it for coal mines. China and water. Much of China's water is not easily accessible where or when it's needed. And China, in the past half-century, has industrialized so rapidly that it has severely depleted most of its water supply. And now the major problem is, as it makes its transition from a low subsistence demographic to high water meat consumption demographics, where is it going to get the water? And increasingly, the Chinese are buying up large amounts of land in Africa for agricultural purposes. More recently, the Chinese business community landed in Iowa and bought up several thousand acres of Iowa farmland, making the Iowa farmers who sold it have a happy retirement. But again, one of the things we need to think about is virtual water. Virtual water is the kind of water that is required to produce a cup of coffee, a hamburger, a pound of spaghetti, that kind of thing. And when you lose a crop, such as wheat or corn, and it all gets grown and harvested and then shipped to India, you have not only shipped corn or wheat, you have shipped a large amount of water. This illustration will be the capstone of my little talk right at the moment. This is the Tibetan Plateau of the Himalayan mountains. And one of the things that you should be able to notice here is how many of the major water systems of Asia flow out of the Tibetan Plateau. You have the Yangtze River, you have the Ganges, you have the Indus, you have the Brahmaputra, and you have the Irrawaddy, and you have the Mekong. And all of these rivers which are in the Tibetan Plateau are glacial rivers, and so you have two phenomena taking place at the same time. Phenomenon number one is glacial melt, which is taking place rapidly in the Himalayan mountains, meaning that the water supply is increasingly going down and down, and yet at the same time in this area, this is where the Chinese are rapidly building dams. Now, in order to make sure that they wouldn't have too many problems from the people who live up here, these people have been forced to be relocated over here, and the people over here have been relocated in the Tibetan Plateau so that calls for the liberation of oppressed peoples in the Tibetan Plateau will fall on deaf ears in the United Nations, because the Chinese will say, oh, there's nothing but Chinese here. Laos, Vietnam, particularly worried about what is going to happen to water levels in the Mekong River. The Mekong is now a river that is heavily polluted because of fertilizer and other toxics that go into the water. And they're very worried about their future. And the Indians are very worried about the Ganges because this is the most sacred river in India. And if this river goes, then one of the great spiritual forces of Indian cultural life will be imperiled. The other thing I want to bear in mind here is that both India and China have come up with engineering ideas to connect their river systems through an elaborate system of canals and pipelines which would transport water, for example, from China, where there is water richness down here in the Yangtze region, to northern part of China, along the Yellow River, where there is water poverty. Because rapidly, the area west of Beijing is turning into what will soon be a replica of the Sonora Desert if current things continue. And so, in doing so, they are largely mindless of the ecological consequences of linking river systems with different biota, different ecologies, different needs, different flow patterns and things of this sort. But to link the Ganges with the Brahmaputra and to link the Yangtze with the Yellow River is going to raise all kinds of interesting problems. I conclude my little presentation, and I'll be open for questioning, with the Murray River of Australia, and I show this because it demonstrates something that is happening worldwide. On the one hand, you're going to learn a lot about rising water levels today, but on the other hand, you should be aware that in some areas, there are not rising water levels, there are no water levels. And the sign that is posted along the banks of the Murray River here in Australia, no swimming, I think says it all. And so as we look at the whole problem of water in a global context with a particular aspect dealing with Asia, we should be thinking in terms of what is going to be happening to us because water is something that we ignore at our own peril. And as Benjamin Franklin says, we don't think of water until the well runs dry. Next, we're going to have Gideon come up, and he'll be talking about his work dealing with floods. Gideon?
So our next panelist, Gideon Mendel, is widely recognized as one of the world's leading contemporary photographers. He first began photographing the topic of AIDS in Africa in 1993, and in the past 20 years, his work on this issue has been widely recognized. He has won 6 World Press Photo Awards, first prize in the American Pictures of the Year competition, a POI Canon Photo Essayist Award, the Eugene Smith Award for Humanistic Photography, and Amnesty International Media Award for photojournalism. His first monograph, A Broken Landscape, HIV and AIDS in Africa, was published in 2001. Since then, he has produced a number of photographic projects working with charities and campaigning organizations. His current practice is working on a variety of advocacy art projects, often involving a mix of photography and video. He is the co-director of Through Positive Eyes project that involves working collaboratively with groups of HIV-positive people in major cities around the world who photograph their own lives with the goal of challenging stigma. And since 2007, he's been working on a global project about flooding entitled Drowning World as a means of addressing the issue of climate change. And some of the works from the Drowning World project are in the exhibition in the Sackler. His work is increasingly being seen in a variety of gallery contexts, with some of his earliest work from South Africa included in the Rise and Fall of Apartheid touring exhibition, and the Drowning World project featured prominently in the ICP Triennial in New York and numerous other public installations and galleries. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gideon Mendel.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, give me 1 second to sort out the screen over here. Okay, so I mean, I'm not sure how much people over here know about my work or about Drowning World. Drowning World is my attempt to engage with the issue of climate change photographically, and I think I've often felt there's a huge problem with the imaging of climate change, in that it's often kind of ice caps and polar bears and is not very individual and very personal. So this is these photographs are taken in 9 different countries around the world. So Asia is an important part of it. I've worked in Thailand and the Philippines. I've worked in Nigeria, Australia, Germany, the UK, and Australia. So it's very much trying to get a global view, and it's looking at the in a sense, the visceral scene of flooding, trying to make it very personal. And it's very much for me about a felt experience. And I thought I'd take you through a sequence that I've just recently developed of the images. And it's very difficult to arrange them with so many different countries, so many different kinds of configurations. So this is a sequence which is really arranged purely by water level. So starting at the highest and going down. And I'll take you through this fairly quickly, starting in Thailand and India, Pakistan. And sorry, these are done over the last 7 years in some of the kind of major flooding scenarios around the world. That's Thailand, Nigeria. And the reporting of flooding is always a very strange thing. These floods in Nigeria, which killed more than 500 people and flooded an eighth of the country, were simultaneous to Sandy and received almost zero media coverage around the world, whereas Sandy was, as you know, hugely kind of covered. This is recently in the UK and Pakistan. So you can see it's just a sequence I've developed with a very, very, very gradually falling water level. That's Germany. That's my American Gothic picture from the UK. And you see the sense of people coming from all over the world, but with some sense of kind of almost a kind of that they're all facing the same kind of biblical deluge. Moving on to a sub-theme of the project, which is the mark of the water on photographs. And in various situations, I've found abandoned photographs or damaged photographs in different kind of contexts affected by the floodwaters. And these were some images found in Australia. And I'm fascinated by the way the floodwaters made their own mark directly on the images. Heading off into almost complete abstraction in this situation. And then this is the context. I'm not sure if you've seen the video piece outside. It includes a serious chapter from the most destructive flood imaginable, which happened in Tacloban, the Philippines. These were people trying to recover possessions after this devastating flood. And I found various photographs and objects, amidst the wreckage, which I rescued. And this image was almost totally obscured. And I think in a sense where I've got no idea who the person is, whether she survived or not, but I'm really fascinated by the faint traces left behind in this almost obscured photograph. And I also found a roll of negatives amidst the wreckage, which I then contacted. And you can see there's just absolutely nothing left of the images, but something quite fascinating and abstract in itself. Okay, having shown you that, I thought I'd show you, although it's just in the sense of this being a very global project and a global issue, the video piece, which is just, it's just completed a few days ago. The sound isn't quite complete yet, but this is my kind of response to the floods in the UK, which happened quite recently. Okay, well, I hope that gives you some sense of the way my work is kind of developing. And I think you can see that I often work shooting both video and stills in the same context, and the work sort of works side by side in different ways. I think we'll have time for more questions and responses to it later, so thank you very much.
So our final panelist, Charles Lim, is a former professional sailor who has represented Singapore in the 1996 Olympics and sailed in the 2007 America's Cup. In between these commitments, he graduated from Central St. Martin's School of Art and Design in London with a BA in Fine Art in 2001. Lim went on to co-found the seminal net art collective Tsunami.net, which participated in Documenta 11 in Kassel, Germany in 2002. Combining his knowledge of the sea and love for making images, he then embarked on the Sea State series, an ongoing body of work that has been exhibited at Manifesta 7 in 2008, the Shanghai Biennale in 2008, and the Singapore Biennale in 2011. Lim's moving image works have been screened at the International Film Festival Rotterdam, the Tribeca Film Festival, and the Edinburgh Film Festival. His 2011 short film, All the Lines Flow Out, which we showed here last night, premiered at the 68th Venice Film Festival and won a special mention, the first ever award there won by a Singaporean production. The piece has since received 3 more awards at other international festivals. And also, he has recently been selected to represent Singapore at next year's Venice Biennale, a very prestigious invitation. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Charles Lim.
I think I had a chance to give my presentation yesterday, so I'll do a very brief one actually today. Where's my phone? I think it closed. So I'll just go through. I'll just talk about one project actually that I'm doing now, which actually will go towards the Venice Biennale project. Okay. Actually, there are many islands in Singapore. Singapore is the country I come from, and how do I start? Is it spacebar? Play. Okay. Actually, there are many islands in Singapore actually that have negative connotations, names with negative connotations. We have this island called Pulau Hantu, which means Ghost Island. And then we have this other island called Sentosa, which is actually, Sentosa actually means peaceful. But actually its original name was Pulau Belakang Mati, which means death behind. And then we have this other island called Pulau Sejahat. And this is the image of Pulau Sejahat. The only image I could find, actually, I found it online. And actually what's interesting about this island is that the word jahat in Malay means naughty or evil. So actually what happens is that we have, every year, the Marine Port Authorities, hydrographers, update the charts because they update the charts every year. And in around 2002, the island of Pulau Sejahat actually disappeared from the charts. And on the image on the left, actually, I don't know, maybe I'll just go up and show you. Pulau Sejahat is around here, and then what happens on the updated one, it's actually kind of disappeared from over there. Sorry if you can't see it, but you can see there's this large thing over there and it says being reclaimed. So what happens is that there's some sort of project going around there and it disappeared. And then there's this other island actually called Pulau Tekong Kecil, which is around here. It's also being reclaimed, but then its identity remains in the chart actually. So what happened was that I was kind of curious when I saw this happen, that we kind of like got rid of our evil island. So what happened was that I went out to the sea to look for this to see what happened actually to an island when it disappears. these are more images actually from a satellite map and what's happened. And then I found this actually, the island actually still, physically the island is still there. So, but it's an island, but it's surrounded by sand all around it. So what happened was that I was kind of like, in a way, funny way, actually I was kind of happy when I found this. Because I always wanted to do a project about land reclamation in Singapore. But I was looking for a kind of like a poetic point to enter into this work actually. Because for me, it's like simply taking pictures of sand doesn't really tell the full story of the reclamation project in Singapore. So, so I came out with a cheesy title for this project. It's called Sea State 2 as Evil Disappears. Yeah. And actually what's interesting about land reclamation in Singapore is that actually Singapore is it's increased more than 25% of its original size. And I think it's the only country to have increased that amount without invading another country. So it's actually quite peaceful in a way. So these are more images of. And actually how we get this sand actually is that we actually get dredging ships. At some point in time, I think around in the 90s actually, 95% of the dredging ships around the world were actually concentrated in Singapore. So the Koreans, the Dutch, the Belgian companies, they were all the dredging ships were in Singapore, and they were all dredging actually. They were all working there. And what they did was that they went across to the border of Singapore, and they actually sucked sand from the seabed from Indonesian islands around those areas, and then they brought it back to Singapore, and then they expanded Singapore. And one of the reasons why this happened was that actually initially Singapore was quite hilly actually, and what they did was they took the sand, the ground from their own space to actually expand Singapore. But what happened was that Singapore we did that so much that actually we ran out of hills to expand anymore actually. So and then what happened was around in the 80s actually and the 70s, the chief scientists actually said that we can't buy it anymore. We have to import sand from outside. So I think what makes Singapore's land reclamation project kind of unique is that it's the cross-border nature of it. The fact that we are in a way buying a country, literally the land actually. And these are more kind of like images of the sand moving that's happening actually. And this is something that you'll see every day actually along the coast in Singapore. You see like barges coming in and they have sand over. And actually what happened was around 2009, 7 islands, Indonesia actually claimed that 7 islands disappeared in Indonesia, and they banned the sale of sand to Singapore. So so Malaysia and Indonesia banned the sale of sand. So our neighbors were not selling sand to us anymore. And the only way we could buy sand now in Singapore is to import it from Vietnam or from Cambodia. And you can verify this very easily. There's this thing called Alibaba.com. It's a kind of like a business to business kind of like almost like like an eBay kind of thing actually, And then if you go down there, you type in Singapore land reclamation, and you'll get all the hits. And it'll say Cambodian company, and it'll say JTC approved sand for sale. Yeah, and that's what's happening actually. And this is the process actually. And for me, it's like quite interesting actually, because in a way, in America or in almost any other place, the idea of land is something that you inherit actually. But in Singapore, I think we have a different kind of relationship to land. It's in a way very unstable. And one of the things that actually when they do the land reclamation is that when they pack the sand is still sinking. Actually, it's still very unstable. So they have to have this machine actually sitting in I don't know whether I have more images, but they're sitting on the land, and it measures the solidity of the sand. And then at some point in time, when it's solid enough, the state of Singapore actually produces a document, and it's called the Proclamation of New Land. And then it's given to the President of Singapore, and the President of Singapore actually signs this document. And through this process, right, it's almost like a ritualistic ceremony, a state magic, actually, in a sense. The area, initially, it's under the authority of the Marine Port Authority. So it's still considered the sea, actually. But once the president signs that, it gets transformed into land, and it goes over to the Singapore Land Authority. So yeah, that's I guess that's it for my talk. Yeah.
So does anyone want to start us off with a question, or no? We'll leave it to me. Oh yeah, please.
It's for the second speaker,
Gideon Mendel.
Mendel, hi.
I was really interested in how you sort of dissolve sort of the dissolution between photographer and the subject, because obviously to take those photos you need to be in the water.
Yeah, very much so. They kind of.
And so that was very much apparent. I could feel your presence there, and I was just wondering, like, how much time did you spend sort of getting into that shot, and did you talk to them before, and then sort of.
Yes, I mean, I think increasingly the whole process becomes a kind of collaboration. I mean, I've been doing it since 2007, and I think in the early phases, I would find people in their houses and do a portrait, but I mean, increasingly, it's often now people taking me back to their homes, and taking time. So I mean, the amount of time can vary. I mean, I think in the most extreme version, Shirley, who you saw at the end of the film, I mean, it was a matter of we kind of. I was trying to find someone in the part of the village who'd be open to me from being photographed, and I was introduced to her. I had a meeting with her the day before. We'd arranged, to take her back to her house. We'd arranged a boat to get her to the house. And in fact, I mean, you can see the sort of the intensity of going into the house. I mean, when she'd left her home, there'd been about 2 inches of water, and that was her first experience of the water being so deep, and it was a very intense experience for me, in fact, to be going into the water with her. And in fact, there was a whole process, which you don't see, because Joe, my assistant, and I, we ended up, all the photographs and albums had gone into the water, so we spent a while kind of fishing in a sitting room, kind of pulling up the old photographs and trying to dry them out and rescue them. So, I mean, that was in some ways the most extreme of the kind of engagements. But, I mean, one thing which happened when I was working in Nigeria, I was focused, I mean, the work works best when I'm focusing on a small community, and I was working in this small town called Igbogeni, and there was a camp for displaced people whose homes were flooded, and we met quite a few people there, and in that context where people were very poor and suffering a lot, I sort of set up an arrangement which is basically, I had a standard rate of $30 that I paid people to take me back to the house. It was the $30 to be taken back to the house and to do some photographs. And some people obviously did it because they wanted the money, but I also had a couple of people who said, no, I don't want your money, I just want you to take a photograph. I want the world to see this. And I think that's happened in many different countries. I think there's some sort of validation people feel, not necessarily that it's going to change their life in any way, but that they want some kind of witnessing of what's happened to them.
It was really powerful. I mean, the frontal images were really amazing, but that one video clip where the woman's opening the door and going in was like this whole other kind of window into that flood experience.
I have a question. Your name is Gideon, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Were any of those images taken in the United States?
No, I mean, I'm very aware that this project is missing the two biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, both America and China. Kind of both deserve to be there because they're the two countries which contribute the most towards global warming.
So why are they missing?
It's a complicated circumstances. I mean, in fact, when Sandy happened, I was working in Nigeria. I wasn't really working in this when New Orleans flooded, but that's, as I go forward, I mean, I've got very little control over environmental factors, but I'm definitely on the alert to try and get to flooding in the USA, because I think it really would be an important country. I mean, I think USA and Canada are places which I've missed out on. I mean, it's the logistics of getting to these floods aren't easy, it's expensive, it's complicated. I need to be, often I'm not available. So I missed the huge floods in China. In 2012, there were floods in China which destroyed more than 100,000 houses. There were massive floods, and I wasn't available to travel then. So, it's not comprehensive, and I'd like it to be more comprehensive than it is. And that's what I'm trying to do as I keep going. It's not finished the project. I'm still keeping going. But absolutely spot on. America is missing.
But in terms of your analysis, I think in the introduction there was comments made about the relationship between what you were going to show us and climate change.
Yeah.
That there was some that you were going after this question
Yeah.
of climate change, showing us through these floods. So you already know that there was Sandy, there was Katrina.
Of course.
All these other things. So in terms of your analysis of this phenomenon, can you tell us something about the controversial question of climate change? Because there's people here who don't believe in it.
Yeah, I guess, I think one mistake a lot of scientists and climate change activists have made recently, that they've kind of thought, if we tell people the facts, if we spell out exactly what the facts are, exactly what the science is, that'll convince people, and that somehow doesn't work because there's so much denial. I am a firm believer in the power of images and photography to change the world in some situations. But so this is my attempt in a very small, it's a very, very small microscopic kind of way to just kind of say, well, these are the people. This is what it looks like. But it is. I don't want to get necessarily too involved in the complicated arguments about climate change, but I think increasingly there are more and more of these extreme weather events, and most of these floods I photographed have been events where the worst flood in living memory, and there seem to be more and more floods and events like that which are the worst in memory. I suppose this is just, I'm trying to show them in many ways the mark the water is leaving behind. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
So I have a question for each of you to answer. It seems that in a way each of you came to using water as an important part of your work from different places. Charles was working with a collective that did work about the internet. John was working with local water issues and became interested in global issues. And Gideon was, of course, AIDS and HIV in Africa. So for each of you, was there a moment that made you start thinking about water issues globally as a subject, or did it sort of just happen gradually? I'm just interested in how you started approaching this topic. So we'll start with Charles and go down the line, maybe.
For me, it was. I think it was. Maybe Gideon has the same issue also. It's the way we represent water actually in art, because it's always seen as a sublime space that you can find God or something. But actually, water, the sea and water is actually a finite space actually, and we need to. It's not a place where you can just dump stuff in there and then it'll go away. So I think artists have been guilty of misrepresenting water actually for a long time. So I think for me it's like I think it'll be interesting to see other ways of actually dealing with this.
One of the crystallizing phrases that really made me begin to seriously think about water, both the lack thereof and too much of, was the phrase technological fix. That it seems in the modern age that people believe that there can be a technological fix to the great problems that affect us in terms of our environment. And usually this technological fix is going to be something that's cheap. And we're finding out today that these technological fixes don't necessarily work out the way we wanted them to, and also that the expectations that we have about water in terms of droughts and floods have been drilled into us, almost like programmed into our ganglia, that water is something that we don't have to worry about, that we don't have to think about, and that we may not be able to manage in the future. Scientists now are beginning to talk about black swan events. These are events that happen with such great irregularity rather than regularity that you can't plan for them, and that they have devastating consequences. And the idea, well, maybe there'll be a storm in 100 years, or maybe there'll be a storm in 500 years. How about a 100-year storm every 3 years? These are things that are happening that people can't really plan for, and yet we have this idea in the back of our heads that we live in a state where we can plan for things, that everything will turn out well as long as we have the technology to help us, whether it's building big gates across the Thames River and building floodgates down here in Georgetown to keep the Sequoia restaurant from going underwater, to being part of a major dam construction effort in China. It doesn't work that way.
I think for me, there was a moment of just almost sensing the kind of power of the image of the flood. And when I'd actually, my initial concept had been, when I began this project, had been to try and do a series of portraits of victims of climate change. So I had in mind that there'll be a victim of fire, fire and drought. And I actually did the initial shoot on the project was working on the north of Kenya with the Gabra pastoralists whose lifestyle was devastated by drought in that area. But the moment I began to photograph floods, I actually realized there's something quite overwhelming about, maybe there's something quite deep in us, the biblical sense of the flood as the image. And I just realized that actually that was, so it wasn't a concept I came with initially, but just the moment I began to work with the images and began to make images of flooding, I realized that I was onto something quite powerful. And I think also when I realized that there was something, and I think the thing people find disconcerting about my floods is that my images is that the people are photographed in quite a conventional way. The portraits are quite conventional portraits, but within quite a kind of hectic and insane environment. So there's this kind of, and also they're not kind of expected. The traditional photojournalistic thing to do would be to photograph people responding to floods, as opposed to the kind of almost silent, still thing of kind of standing still and kind of being photographed. So I just realized there's something there which could tell quite a profound story.
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience here? Yes.
John, question for you. I've heard some very dismal forecasts about the life expectancy of the Salton Sea. Do you have any thoughts on that?
The what sea?
The Salton Sea in California going away?
Well, if you continue to drain the aquifers through irrigation, these places will go away. It's just like if you don't take care of your teeth, they will go away. If you don't take care of your lakes and your major bodies of water, they in turn will go away. And the consequences in terms of dust storms, heavily laced with salt and other chemicals, can be quite harrowing out there. There's an effort now to refurbish the Salton Sea, largely because now farmers are being persuaded out there to sell their water rights to cities like Sacramento and places, which in turn will give the area where the Salton Sea is a kind of breathing space, because they won't take the kind of as much water as agriculture, because agriculture takes 70% of all the world's water, and residential takes a bit less. But I would like to add to that is that one of the problems that we're going to have in America is that we don't really have the water problems that other countries have, but they will soon be coming. I remember a number of years ago when my wife and I were in England, I came across a fellow at a party, and I asked him what he did for a living just to make cocktail chit-chat, and he said he was in irrigation. I said, irrigation in England? He said, well, you'd be surprised. There are areas that are very water-starved. And so all of these things are forcing us to make decisions, and we don't like to make these decisions because they're going to involve taxing power, increasing interference from the state, and they're going to be largely unwelcome. Any other questions? Oh, in the back, yes, hi.
Thanks for all your work. It's certainly a critical topic. Just for sort of the fun of it, if you all were each going to come back
Well, in 100 years, we will have seen perhaps one of the major tidal waves of environmental refugees in America and over the world, because people are going to be violently and politically displaced, largely because of rising tides. The Maldives in 100 years will be gone. Large parts of Florida will be gone. Large parts of the southern tip of Manhattan may be flooded. But I think the most important thing to think about is the large movement and migration of peoples who are going to be forced to move, largely because of changes in water tables, flooding, and droughts.
I think we know that the development of human civilization over the last 10,000 years has happened within a very fairly kind of stable kind of temperature range. And if CO2 emissions continue at the same rate, which sadly, it looks like the global community, political community, can't actually find the will to change that, largely because of, I think, the insane addiction all of our economies have to incessant growth. So if that can't be turned around, within 30 to 40 years, it looks like we're going to go, if the temperature goes up on average of 2 degrees, we're going to be going out of that parameter of where human civilization has developed. And I think the truth is nobody knows what that's going to do. We don't know. It may be benign. It may be totally catastrophic. And I think that's the truth. Actually, once global temperatures go so much higher, we just don't know what impact it's going to have.
So Charles, will Singapore still be around 100 years from now, do you think?
Actually, I'm not sure. What's the projected increase? Is it 2 meters?
About a meter.
Okay. Actually, in Singapore, the parliament, they had a debate about this. Like, we took our hills down, we're reclaiming. Actually, Singapore is very flat, really susceptible to this kind of threat, actually. And then they came out with the conclusion that we are safe, because they said that when we reclaim higher than we reclaim to 1.5 meters. So they think that they are safe. I don't know.
Well,
they think we are safe.
I wouldn't bet the ranch on it.
So, yeah. So maybe I'll buy a hilltop property.
So maybe 1 or 2 more questions if you have any. Does anyone final word? Sure? Yeah.
Yes. On these islands that appear and disappear, or there and then they're not there, are they inhabited? Do people live there?
Actually, what happened was that Singapore used to have people living on these islands. Actually, they're called the Southern Islands. They had communities of people living in there. And what happened was that these people that were living along these islands, their relationship to the neighbors, to the countries that were across, it was very porous, actually. And this was right during decolonization, actually. Because, it used to be Singapore used to be a colony, Indonesia was a colony, Malaysia was a colony. And then there was all this mixing going on. And then what happened was that when nation building came in Singapore, what happened was that the government, what they did was that they took the people away from the islands to live in HDB flats in the center of Singapore. So what happened is that the sea used to be a cultural space, actually. But what has happened is that these places have been depopulated, and now it's become a corporate military zone, actually. And actually, as an artist, when I'm going out to the sea, trying to take images, and actually, I face quite a lot of resistance, actually. Like, what the hell are you doing here? This, that kind of thing. And I think, there's this other artist, what's his name? American artist. Brain freeze. He made a work, actually. It's called Forgotten Spaces, a film. And it's also kind of talking about it, actually, about the corporatization of sea, actually, in a sense. So in a way, when the public is taken away from these spaces, corporates go in there, and in a way, they can do whatever they want. And that's what has happened in Singapore. Yeah. And this effect has happened so much that Actually, not even in Singapore, the surrounding islands, like the Ria Islands, those things, the things that have been happening in Singapore, that situation has been replicated to our neighboring countries, actually.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Thank you for coming.